You wake each day believing you are free, yet your mind is already in motion before you choose a single thought. A memory intrudes, a worry tightens your chest, an expectation presses quietly from the future into the present moment. You have not decided to think these things, yet they arrive as if summoned. And in that instant, subtle, almost invisible, you are no longer in command. You are responding, reacting, following. This is the discomfort most people avoid naming. Not the pain of obvious suffering, but the quieter realization that your inner life is not entirely yours. That your mood can be shifted by a message, a look, a memory, a stranger's opinion. That your attention can be hijacked, your emotions pulled, your peace disturbed without permission. The Stoics would not soften this truth for you. They would say plainly, if your mind can be controlled from the outside, then you are not free, no matter how independent your life appears. You may resist this. You may tell yourself this is just stress, just modern life, just human nature. But Marcus Aurelius warned himself, you become what you give your attention to. And if your attention is constantly claimed by fear, approval, comparison, or resentment, then your character is being shaped by forces you did not choose. The harsh truth is not that life is difficult. The harsh truth is that an undisciplined mind makes life unnecessarily heavy. Ask yourself, slowly and honestly, how often do you feel pulled rather than directed? How often does your emotional state depend on something external going right? How often do you replay conversations, anticipate conflict, or brace yourself for outcomes that do not yet exist? This is not awareness. It is captivity disguised as preparation. Epictetus spoke directly to this condition when he said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." He was not speaking metaphorically. He meant that freedom is not granted by circumstance, wealth, or status. It is earned through inner command. And without that command, you live reactively, buffeted by impressions, opinions, impulses that arrive unexamined and leave you exhausted. The discomfort deepens when you realize how normalized this has become. You are praised for being responsive, for caring deeply, for staying informed, for remaining available. But nowhere are you taught how to guard your inner life. Nowhere are you trained to pause before reacting, to question the first impulse, to separate what happens from what it means. And so control slips away gradually, not through force, but through neglect. This is not about becoming cold or detached. Stoicism never asked you to feel less. It asked you to feel with clarity. Seneca observed, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Your suffering, then, is not only imposed, it is rehearsed, repeated, reinforced, and every unexamined reaction strengthens the habit of being controlled. Here is the truth that unsettles but also liberates. The mind that is not trained will always serve something else. The opinions of others, the pressure of time, the fear of loss, the hunger for approval. If you do not decide what governs you, something else will decide for you. This realization is not meant to discourage you. It is meant to wake you up. Because the Stoics believed something radical for their time, and even more radical now, that the human mind can be trained to remain unshaken, clear, and self-directed regardless of external conditions. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but deliberately. You are not broken, you are untrained, and what can be trained can be reclaimed. This is where the journey begins, not with comfort but with clarity, not with reassurance but with responsibility. The moment you see how control has been leaking from you, you are no longer entirely powerless. You are positioned to take it back. Now that the discomfort has been named, your mind may search for relief. It may try to reinterpret what you've just seen in softer terms. It may whisper that this loss of control is unavoidable, that everyone lives this way, that mastery of the mind is unrealistic in a world this loud and demanding. The Stoics anticipated this resistance. They knew that when the truth threatens familiar habits, the mind looks for escape. But Stoicism does not offer escape. It offers a reframe, one that replaces helplessness with responsibility. Here is the Stoic reframe you must sit with. You are not controlled because the world is powerful. You are controlled because your inner responses are unexamined. This is not an insult. It is a diagnosis. And like all accurate diagnoses, it brings discomfort before it brings healing. You may believe that your reactions are automatic, that emotions simply happen to you, that certain people or situations make you feel the way you do. But Epictetus dismantles this belief at its root when he says, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." If this is true, and the Stoics built an entire philosophy upon it, then the real pain point is not external pressure, but internal interpretation. Notice how this changes the landscape. If your distress comes from interpretation, then relief cannot come from controlling the world. It must come from understanding yourself. And this is where the pain sharpens, because understanding yourself means admitting how often you surrender judgment without noticing. How quickly you accept the first story your mind tells you. How rarely you pause to ask whether that story is true, necessary, or useful. The pain point most people live with is not chaos, but confusion. You feel pulled in different directions because you have not established a clear inner hierarchy. You respond to urgency instead of importance. You react to emotion instead of principle. You mistake intensity for truth. And when everything feels equally pressing, you lose the ability to choose deliberately. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Yet how often do you remember this power in the moment of tension? How often do you exercise it before the reaction has already taken hold? This is where Stoicism diverges sharply from modern self-help. It does not promise you will feel good. It promises you will see clearly. And clarity can be painful because it reveals how much of your suffering has been rehearsed rather than imposed. How often you have tightened your own chains by believing every thought that appeared in your mind. The Stoic reframe asks you to stop asking, "How do I control what happens to me?" and start asking, "How do I relate to what happens to me?" This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. One question leads to frustration and exhaustion. The other leads to discipline and strength. You may feel resistance here because this reframe removes excuses. It does not allow you to blame time, people, systems, or circumstances for your inner disorder. It places responsibility back where it belongs. And responsibility can feel heavy when you are not used to carrying it consciously. But the Stoics would tell you that what feels heavy at first becomes stabilizing with practice. Seneca observed, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." Applied to the mind, this means that when your attention is scattered across fears, desires, regrets, and expectations, you lose your center. The pain you feel, restlessness, anxiety, irritability, is the cost of this scattering, not because you are weak, but because you have not yet learned to gather yourself. The Stoic reframe does not ask you to suppress emotion. It asks you to understand its origin, to see that emotions are signals, not orders, that impulses are invitations, not commands, that you have a choice, not after the reaction, but before it fully forms. And this is where empowerment quietly begins, not with confidence, not with motivation, but with the recognition that you are not condemned to live reactively, that the mind can be trained to pause, to question, to choose. That control is not seized in dramatic moments, but practiced in small, repeated acts of awareness. The pain point remains, but it is no longer vague. It has a shape now, and what has a shape can be worked with. The Stoics believed that once you see clearly where suffering comes from, you are already less controlled by it. This reframe is the threshold. On one side is a life governed by impulse and reaction. On the other is a life governed by principle and reason. Crossing it does not require force. It requires commitment. And from this commitment, the principles emerge. The first Stoic principle you must understand is foundational. Without it, every other practice becomes fragile, temporary, and easily overturned by pressure. This principle is not motivational, it is structural. It does not aim to make you feel strong. It aims to make you unshakable. The principle is this: separate what is within your control from what is not, relentlessly, daily, without compromise. This idea is so simple that most people underestimate it. Yet Epictetus built his entire philosophy upon it because he saw what happens when this boundary is ignored. He began his teachings with a stark declaration: some things are up to us and some things are not. Everything that follows Stoicism flows from this distinction, and everything that goes wrong in the mind comes from confusing it. You lose control of your mind the moment you try to govern what was never yours to command. Other people's opinions, their emotions, their behavior, outcomes, timing, luck, recognition. When you invest emotional energy into these things, you create a dependency, and dependency is the root of psychological captivity. Look closely at your own inner life. How much of your mental energy is spent rehearsing conversations that may never happen, worrying about how you are perceived, trying to anticipate reactions, hoping for validation, resenting outcomes you could not have prevented? This is not awareness, it is misdirected control. Marcus Aurelius warned himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Notice the precision of this statement: not power over people, not power over circumstances, power over your mind, and only your mind. The Stoics were not pessimists, they were realists. They knew exactly where power ends and where it begins. The first principle trains you to reclaim energy by withdrawing it from the wrong places. This is not withdrawal from life. It is withdrawal from illusion. The illusion that if you think hard enough, worry long enough, or care intensely enough, you can control outcomes. You cannot, and every attempt drains you. Here is the discomfort this principle forces you to confront. Much of your anxiety comes from trying to manage the uncontrollable. The moment you stop doing that, anxiety loses its fuel. Not immediately, not magically, but gradually as the habit weakens. This requires discipline in the smallest moments. When irritation arises because someone behaves differently than you expected, you pause and ask, "Is this within my control?" When fear arises about a future outcome, you pause and ask the same question. When resentment builds because reality does not match your preferences, you ask it again. At first, this feels repetitive, mechanical, almost naive, but repetition is how the mind is retrained. The Stoics did not rely on insight alone. They relied on practice, daily, deliberate reminders that redirected attention back to what actually belongs to you: your judgments, your intentions, your actions. Seneca wrote, "If a man knows not which port he sails, no wind is favorable." The first principle defines the port. It tells you where to aim your effort, where to invest emotional energy, where to refuse engagement. Without this clarity, every disturbance feels personal. With it, many disturbances simply lose relevance. This principle does not make life easier. It makes it clearer. And clarity reduces unnecessary suffering. You still face difficulty. You still encounter loss. You still experience pain. But you no longer add the extra layer of resistance, the mental argument with reality. You begin to notice something subtle. When you stop demanding control over the uncontrollable, you gain more control over yourself. Your reactions slow. Your emotions become less volatile. Your attention returns to the present moment, where action is actually possible. This is the first act of mental sovereignty, not dominance, not suppression, but proper placement of effort. And once this boundary is firmly established, the mind becomes ready for the next discipline, one that prepares you not for control, but for impact. Once you have learned to separate what is within your control from what is not, the mind encounters a new challenge. Not confusion, but resistance. Because clarity alone does not protect you from shock. Even when you know your boundaries, life will still press against them. People will still disappoint you. Events will still unfold against your preferences. And when this happens unexpectedly, the mind reflexively tightens. Control is lost not because you forgot the principle, but because you were unprepared for impact. This is why the second Stoic principle exists. The principle is this: anticipate difficulty calmly so it cannot rule you emotionally. The Stoics did not wait for adversity to arrive before strengthening themselves. They understood something most people learn too late. Surprise is what turns difficulty into suffering. Seneca stated this plainly when he wrote, "He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand." What overwhelms you is rarely the hardship itself. It is the collision between expectation and reality. Notice how much of your distress comes from the silent belief that things should go smoothly, that people should behave rationally, that effort should be rewarded quickly, that progress should be linear. These assumptions are rarely spoken aloud, yet they shape your emotional reactions. And when reality violates them, as it always does, you feel not only pain, but offense. The Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity, is not pessimism. It is psychological armor. Each morning, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he would meet interference, ingratitude, selfishness, and arrogance, not to complain about them, but to remove their power to shock him. When you expect friction, friction no longer feels like a personal attack. This principle trains emotional resilience by aligning expectation with reality. You are not saying that things will go wrong. You are saying that they can, and that possibility, once acknowledged, loses its emotional leverage. The mind stops clinging to ideal outcomes. It becomes ease flexible, adaptive, harder to destabilize. Ask yourself honestly, how often do you lose control not because something is unbearable, but because it is unexpected? How often does anger flare because someone failed to meet an unspoken standard? How often does anxiety spike because the future did not unfold according to plan? The Stoics would say this is not fate's cruelty, it is expectation's arrogance. Epictetus taught that when you kiss your child, you should remind yourself that they are mortal, not to diminish love, but to deepen appreciation and reduce terror. This discipline applies to everything. When you acknowledge impermanence and difficulty in advance, you are less likely to collapse when they appear. This principle does not harden you, it steadies you. It teaches you to meet difficulty without indignation, without drama, without the inner cry of "this should not be happening," because that cry is where control dissolves. Over time, this practice rewires your emotional baseline. You stop demanding ease. You stop equating discomfort with failure. You begin to see challenge as neutral material, something to be worked with rather than resisted. And resistance, the Stoics knew, is what multiplies pain. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This is not optimism. It is orientation. When you expect obstacles, they become part of the path rather than interruptions to it. And when obstacles are expected, they no longer dominate your emotional state. This principle grants you a quiet strength, the strength of being unsurprised, of remaining internally upright even when circumstances lean against you. Others may panic, others may react, but you have already rehearsed this moment in your mind, and what has been rehearsed does not overwhelm. This is the second act of mental mastery, not controlling events, but disarming their emotional impact before it arrives. And once you are no longer ruled by surprise, the mind becomes capable of something far more demanding, choosing who you will be, regardless of what happens. When you are no longer confused about control, and no longer destabilized by surprise, the work becomes more exacting. This is where Stoicism stops being defensive and becomes constructive, because now the question is no longer how to avoid being controlled, but what will govern you instead. A mind without a clear ruling principle does not remain free for long. It simply trades one master for another. The third principle is this: choose your values before the world chooses them for you. This is where most people lose control without realizing it, not because they are weak, but because they have never made a deliberate decision about who they intend to be under pressure. And when pressure arrives, as it always does, the mind defaults. It reaches for habit, for impulse, for whatever has been reinforced most often. In that moment, control is not lost suddenly. It is surrendered automatically. Marcus Aurelius understood this danger intimately. He reminded himself again and again, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. This was not moral posturing. It was a safeguard, a way of ensuring that his actions would not be dictated by fear, convenience, or the desire to please. Because without a pre-selected standard, the strongest emotion in the room becomes the authority. Ask yourself honestly, when you are tired, provoked, or uncertain, what governs your actions? Is it reason or mood? Is it principle or pressure? Is it clarity or urgency? These moments reveal the true hierarchy of your mind, and if you have not consciously chosen that hierarchy, it has already been chosen for you. The Stoics believed that virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance was not an abstract ideal. It was a practical operating system, a way of ensuring that no matter what happened externally, your internal conduct remained consistent. Seneca wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." For the Stoic, that why was not success or comfort. It was alignment with reason. Here is the pain this principle exposes. Much of what controls you is not force, but convenience. You say what is easy instead of what is true. You do what avoids discomfort instead of what is right. You delay what matters in favor of what feels urgent. And each small concession teaches the mind that principle is optional. Over time, optional becomes irrelevant. This is not about becoming rigid or moralistic. It is about becoming predictable to yourself. The Stoics valued this deeply. A person who knows how they will act under pressure is far less likely to be controlled by it. When values are chosen in advance, temptation loses its persuasive power. You are not negotiating in the moment. You are executing a decision already made. Consider how often you replay situations afterward, wishing you had acted differently, spoken more clearly, set a boundary. Maintained composure. Those regrets are not failures of intelligence. They are failures of preparation. You knew afterward what mattered. Stoicism teaches you to know it beforehand. Epictetus emphasized this when he said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Identity precedes action. If you have not decided who you are, the world will assign you a role, and that role will serve its needs, not yours. This principle restores control by narrowing your focus. You stop asking, "What should I do to get the best outcome?" and start asking, "What action aligns with the person I am choosing to be?" The first question leads to anxiety and compromise. The second leads to consistency and self-respect. There is discomfort here because choosing values means accepting cost. You may lose approval, you may disappoint others, you may forego short-term comfort. But the Stoics were clear. Peace purchased through self-betrayal is not peace. It is postponement of conflict, moved inward. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years." He meant, do not delay alignment. Do not postpone integrity. Do not assume there will be a later moment when it is easier to be principled. The moment is always now, and control is always exercised in the present. As you practice this principle, something stabilizes within you. Decisions become simpler even when they are difficult. You stop being pulled in multiple directions. You stop improvising under pressure. You begin to feel internally coherent, one action reinforcing the next. This coherence is a form of power, quiet, unadvertised, but unmistakable. Others may not agree with you. They may not understand you, but they will find it harder to manipulate you, harder to rush you, harder to pull you into emotional reactions you have already decided not to indulge. This is the third act of mental mastery, the replacement of impulse with principle, the elevation of values over mood, the refusal to let circumstance dictate character. And once this is in place, the mind is finally prepared for the deepest work of all, not just discipline, but authority over itself. Now the work turns inward in a way that cannot be performed, displayed, or rushed. Up to this point, you have learned how control is lost, how it is reclaimed, and what principles must govern you. But here, the Stoics ask something far more demanding, not what you do, but who you are becoming through repeated inner decisions. Because power in the Stoic sense is not a sudden acquisition. It is the byproduct of sustained inner alignment. This is where reflection becomes authority. Most people believe they lack power because they lack influence, resources, or certainty. The Stoics would tell you something more uncomfortable. You feel powerless because you are not yet steady within yourself. Your emotions still surge faster than your judgment. Your impulses still speak louder than your values. And when this happens, control slips away not through force, but through speed. Seneca wrote, "The mind that is anxious about future events is miserable." Why? Because anxiety is not a response to reality. It is a response to imagined futures treated as present facts. And the mind that lives in imagined futures is never fully present, never fully grounded, never fully in command. Deep reflection is how the Stoics slowed the mind down enough to regain command. Not by suppressing thoughts, but by observing them. Not by denying emotion, but by interrogating it. You learn to ask again and again, what is happening within me right now? What judgment am I making? What assumption am I accepting without examination? This is not overthinking, it is clarity. Marcus Aurelius practiced this relentlessly. He reminded himself, you do not have to turn this into something, it does not have to upset you. Notice the restraint in this statement. He is not denying the event. He is denying the automatic escalation. He is reclaiming the space between impression and response. And that space is where personal power lives. The modern world conditions you to react instantly, to respond immediately, to feel first and think later. Stoicism reverses this order. It teaches you to feel, yes, but to decide before you act. And this decision-making faculty grows stronger only when it is exercised under pressure. Here is the deep reflection you must face. Every time you react without reflection, you train your mind to be governed by impulse. Every time you pause, even briefly, you strengthen your authority over yourself. This is not dramatic. It is cumulative, and over time, it changes how you experience life. You begin to notice that emotions rise and fall more quickly when you do not cling to them. That anger dissipates faster when it is not justified internally. That fear loses intensity when it is examined rather than obeyed. This is not detachment from life. It is intimacy with reality without surrendering your act. Inside, Epictetus described this state with precision. Do not seek for things to happen the way you want them to, rather wish that what happens happen the way it happens. This is often misunderstood as passivity. It is not. It is alignment. It means you stop wasting energy resisting facts and start directing energy toward response. And response is always within your control. As reflection deepens, something subtle but profound occurs. You stop identifying completely with your thoughts. You begin to see them as events in the mind rather than commands from it. You realize that not every thought deserves belief. Not every emotion deserves action. Not every impulse deserves expression. This realization is deeply empowering, because if you are not your thoughts, then you are the one who evaluates them. If you are not your emotions, then you are the one who chooses how to express them. And that chooser, the rational faculty, is the seat of Stoic power. The Stoics call this the hegemonikon, the ruling part of the mind. When it is weak, you are ruled by appetite, fear, and impulse. When it is strong, you are governed by reason. Strengthening it is not about force. It is about consistency, daily reflection, honest self-examination, willingness to correct yourself without self-hatred. You may notice that as this power grows, your need to control others diminishes. You stop arguing to be right. You stop reacting to provocation. You stop chasing validation, not because you no longer care, but because you are no longer internally scattered. You are centered. This is what the Stoics meant by freedom, not the absence of constraints, but the absence of inner tyranny, the tyranny of impulse, the tyranny of fear, the tyranny of unexamined belief. Personal power in this sense is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not seek recognition. But it is unmistakable. Others may feel it without understanding it. They may find it harder to rush you, manipulate you, or pull you into emotional chaos, because chaos no longer finds an echo inside you. This is the reward of deep reflection. Not comfort, but command. Not ease, but steadiness. Not domination, but sovereignty. And once this sovereignty is established, the final transformation becomes possible. Not just mastery of the mind, but a shift in identity itself. Now the final shift takes place. Not as a sudden revelation, not as a dramatic breakthrough, but as a quiet settling into something firmer than emotion and deeper than motivation. This is the point the Stoics were always guiding you toward, even when they spoke of discipline, adversity, or reason. Not techniques, not habits, but identity. Because the ultimate goal was never to control your mind occasionally. It was to become someone who cannot be ruled. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." But read this carefully. He did not say the quantity of thoughts, not their speed, not their intensity, their quality, and quality is not accidental. It is cultivated, chosen, reinforced through countless small acts of inner alignment. At this stage, you no longer experience Stoic principles as instructions. They feel more like recognition. You begin to notice that situations which once controlled you now pass through you with less force. That provocations arrive but do not take hold. That anxiety appears but does not dominate, not because life has softened, but because you have stabilized. This is the identity shift. You no longer see yourself as someone trying to manage emotions. You see yourself as someone who governs judgments. You no longer think of freedom as comfort or ease. You recognize it as inner non-negotiability. You no longer ask, "How do I stop feeling this?" You ask, "What does reason require of me now?" This is what it means to never be controlled again, not that nothing affects you, but that nothing owns you. Epictetus expressed this with ruthless clarity. If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, "He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone." This is not humor for its own sake. It is psychological independence, the refusal to let external opinion determine internal balance. At this level, your peace is no longer reactive. It is structural, built into how you interpret events, how you weigh impressions, how you decide what matters. You are no longer improvising your inner life under pressure. You are executing a philosophy you have embodied. And this embodiment changes how you move through the world. You speak more slowly because you are not trying to defend an image. You listen more carefully because you are not planning reactions. You choose more deliberately because urgency no longer rules you. Others may not understand this shift. Some may find it unsettling. When you stop being emotionally available to chaos, chaos loses its leverage. When you stop reacting automatically, manipulation becomes ineffective. When you stop chasing approval, pressure weakens. Seneca warned, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." Extend this inward. It is not the person who feels emotion who is weak, but the one who craves emotional certainty. You no longer need certainty to remain composed. You have trained something more durable, trust in your capacity to respond well. This is the Stoic self. Not detached from life, not numbed, not indifferent, but grounded, internally ordered, difficult to destabilize. You still experience loss, frustration, desire, fear, but these experiences no longer define you. They inform you. They pass through a mind that no longer confuses feeling with command. The identity shift is complete when you no longer ask, "How do I control my mind today?" Because control has been replaced by command. You wake knowing that whatever appears, praise or criticism, success or setback, calm or chaos, you will meet it as yourself, not as impulse, not as reaction, but as reason practiced and embodied. Marcus Aurelius closed one of his reflections with a simple directive to himself. Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved and the raging of the sea still falls around it. That is who you are becoming. Not untouched, but unmoved where it matters. This is not an ending. It is a position, a stance you return to daily, and once assumed, it becomes increasingly difficult for anything external to dislodge. You are no longer learning Stoicism. You are living it.